Let's talk about our hand position when at the harp. The first thing I want to talk about is your wrist. Now, when people approach talking about the wrist at the harp, a lot of the time you'll hear people talking about the elbow. Keep your elbows out. Think about sitting regally at the harp. Well, when you hold your elbow out, it actually creates a nice straight wrist. Now, the reason that we want a nice straight wrist is because in your wrist, all your tendons that work all these fingers, they have to move through this small space inside your wrist. So let's all put our wrists so we have a bend, and then we'll move our fingers. Doesn't feel so good, right? You can feel everything moving in here and it feels tense. Now let's straighten our wrists up. Now wiggle your fingers. Feels good, right? The straight wrist allows the tendons to move freely and work your fingers. So yes, you need your elbow out, but what you're really focusing on is having a nice, straight, strong wrist so that your fingers can move freely and feel really good. Now, yes, I'm talking about having a nice, straight wrist, but that doesn't mean a stiff wrist. You should still be able to move your wrist as you're playing. You want it to be strong and straight, but have movement and flow. So that's the first thing. Watch out for that wrist. When you're ready to put your hand onto your harp, you want to be playing in the middle of your strings. Yes, we might play lower down on our strings. This will give us a slightly different sound, and we might play higher on our strings, which will again give us a different sound. But for your general hand position and for the best sound production at the harp, we want to be in the middle of our strings. So make sure when you place your fingers onto the strings, we're going right to the middle. Also, when you're placing your fingers onto the strings, make sure you're placing your finger tips. We don't want our fingers coming through the strings, okay? I think they look like spiders' legs when we try and do that. We want to place the tips of our fingers on the strings, this fleshy tip. And that's going to create the best sound when you actually pluck that harp string into your hand. You probably have heard harpers talking about keeping your thumb high. And that's correct, we do want to keep our thumb high and our fingers down. But remember that everyone's hands are a little bit different. It's life's great tapestry. And my hands and fingers are quite small. These are like my little cocktail sausages. They're small fingers. And so when I go to place my fingers on the harp, my fingers look very long. If you have longer fingers, your fingers are going to look slightly more curved. The important thing to watch out for is that your fingers are always below your thumb. So yes, your thumb needs to be high, but if you have longer fingers, they're going to look slightly more curved. And if you have shorter fingers like me, they might look longer on the strings. Just make sure you're keeping them below the thumb. The last point relates to what I was just discussing. Work with the hand you've been dealt with. Everyone's hands, arms, wrists, bodies, we're all made differently, and everyone is going to look slightly different when they approach their harp. They're going to have a slightly different playing position, and they're going to have a slightly different hand shape. So take all the tips and then work with what you've got in front of you. Make sure you feel comfortable and you have no tension in any part of your hand, and you'll be spot on.